Okay, Christine, you're live now. So I'm going to make you host again. Todd will be joining you as your TA.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome, everyone. We will wait just a minute till everybody rolls on into class. If anybody has any questions, we have someone from Get Set Up here named Todd. He is in the chat room if you need to send him any questions. He'll also be monitoring our chat so that he can pass on any questions to me. But also when I teach my classes, I tell my learners, if you want to speak up and interrupt me, that's okay. You can say, hey, Chris, I have a question, and we can answer it right away then. Anybody new here today, we welcome you, and I'm happy you found us and are joining me in this class. And for everyone returning, thank you for coming back. I am going to start sharing my screen, and you should see the first slide for my presentation, which is the name of the class, Doodling to De-Stress. And hopefully we're not having too much stress today, but if we are, this is going to give you a little kind of a tool to use to get rid of it. So I am putting my gallery of people over here to the side. That's why you may see me look left. Thank you for sharing your faces with me. I like to see people's, responses, or if they have questions, or if they're getting excited. I also will try to watch some of the chat, but like I said, Todd's there to monitor that also. So if you have a question, you can put it in there. So welcome. And this class is something that I came up with because during these past few months, actually almost the whole year now, we've had a lot of different situations to cause us stress. And doodling is something I've done for a long time. And I thought of combining the two, and this is the idea I came up with. So actually, let me talk a little bit about the first picture here on the screen. This is an example of something I did probably 10 years ago when I first found out about this specific way of controlling a doodle and focusing your brain on a doodle, much more useful for de-stressing than some of the other typical doodling that we do. So that's why we're going to look at this type of doodling that's called Zen doodling. So for those of you who haven't had me in a class before, my name is Christine Hess, and I live in South Central Pennsylvania, right below the capital of Harrisburg. I have a BS in art education, and then I went on for more classes in training and development. And for 38 years, I worked in healthcare. I did work with children on a pediatric floor and got to use my art there and did education with them. And then I transitioned into the patient education part of it, where it was more adult education. I've also done a lot of little things on the side that I've had fun with, such as an antique business, and I'm involved with environmental education. I do like that I get to interact here with older adults in Get Set Up's platform, and that we have live interaction. So for those of you who are watching live stream, welcome. But remember, we learn from each other with cameras on, where we can share our words. I get some valuable input from my learners. So by joining a class and becoming a part of Get Set Up with an account, you can do that. And it's a very give and take kind of thing that I have with my learners, and I love that about it. We are recording this class, so if you would like a link to the recording, you can send an email to help@getsetup.io and just say you'd like a link to the recording of Doodling to Destress that was presented today. Remember, Get Set Up is not paid to promote any specific products. And today in the agenda, what we're going to cover is we're going to learn what a Zen doodle is, just in case you've never heard of that phrase before. We're going to see how doodling can help to ease your stress. And then we're going to look at a process that I take you through, and you'll be able to create a Zen doodle by seeing that process. And then I'll wrap everything up. So if you thought about it, you could have brought along a pen and paper. If you have one handy, or a pencil, grab it, and maybe you'll want to practice and do some of the things that I'm talking about as we walk through it. So does anybody already doodle of the people I can see? Anybody out there already do doodling? Well, oh, I see a wave from Bill. Good, thanks, Bill. And yes, Julia said yes, she does. Great. So what this is going to look at is how we can kind of use that doodling to our advantage. So I looked up the word origin because I like to look at words and grammatical things. And I found that the origin comes from German, and it's from 1935, where it was pulled from dialectal doodle, fritter away time is the meaning, trifle, or associated with dawdle. And the word itself means to scrawl aimlessly. So we can see how that all applies to the word doodle and what we do with it. And of interest is I'm in a very heavily populated Pennsylvania Dutch population. And it reminded me of a lot of the words they use, noodle, even, some German words that now trickled down into our Pennsylvania Dutch. So it makes sense that that's where it comes from. And so the picture on the left-hand side is one that I found that definitely reminded me of what I did in my notebooks when I was like in 6th, 7th, 8th grade and bored, probably in a class like history or math. Yes, I was taking notes, but my mind was wandering. And since art was my favorite subject, more often I was trying to do something with little, artistic creations. And this is what the borders of my pages look like, where I do a little bit of scribbles and a little bit of lines and words and pictures. So this to me is the very typical type of doodling I was used to from way back when. And then this is more present day association with Doodle because they're tiny little icons, and little icons pop up in a lot of our electronic things we do. But you know, even in my doodles, I had little tiny pictures. So that's where all these tiny figures and icons come from that are also looked at doodling. And I found a really good YouTube reference here for some guy that's known as Mr. Doodle. And I thought it would be fun for you to see how he does doodling and how it works into his practice.
Oh my God.
So it's really fast and sped up, but he's become so known for this. You see, he even has fabric on that was made into an outfit that's made out of his doodles. So it's really connected. And I'm sure he's very much focused on the process of creating those doodles and filling it in. That's a large white wall space he's doing. He probably started out on paper just in a much smaller way, and he's developed his own style and his own flair for how it looks. So here's another one on paper that he's doing with a pen. And because he has his own styles and characters now, you can very much see it's his own branded way of doing this. And I'm sure he has lots of products that go along with it. So I just thought that was a really cool, interesting kind of present day use of somebody who does doodles. And when I looked into some other examples, I found this reference to ancient hieroglyphics, which to me are the old-fashioned way of doodling, because in Egypt they did these walls and stones and even put it on paper where they did these little tiny figures. If you look, there are some divisions with little scribbles in. So to me, these are ancient doodles and another good example of figures used and icons and tiny little things in doodling. But today, what we're going to focus on is called Zen doodling. So when I looked up also the definition of a doodle, it's called an aimless or casual scribble, design, or sketch. That's what is a doodle. Then when you look at Zen, the word Zen means peaceful and calm. So when you add them together, you get a Zen doodle, and that simply means the art of drawing designs using structured patterns with a focus of mind. And that's the part I want you to remember as we walk through all these examples and how-tos, is that when you're doing this, hopefully you are concentrating on the creating process. Your brain is focused on that, and other worries and other thoughts are getting pushed out. And so I also think about when I worked on pediatrics with the children, there were times when they might have to have a painful procedure done, an IV started, something like that. And I would use guided imagery or sometimes art to get them very focused on thinking about that and not thinking about the pain. And for those of us who went through Lamaze classes with childbirth and learned breathing techniques, they also use breathing techniques with people who are getting painful procedures such as burn treatments done. So there's a lot of things they've learned that if you focus your brain on one thing and really can concentrate on it, you're pushing out the other things. And that's what this Zen doodling is in a simplistic way. So all you really need for it is pen and paper, and that's a really nice thing about it. Yes, you can use pencil in the beginning for just a little bit of it, but mostly I go right to my pen and paper. And these are examples here. The two on the right are my own creations. The one on the top is the one I had in the very first slide. And the one on the bottom is one that's more like a pattern. So, you know, this is a controlled little space where you fill in all different designs in those divided areas. This one is a repetitious pattern, but you're still focused on the creating of the repetition and putting that pattern in there. So that's very much concentrated on that creation of the design. The one on the left is one I found on Google when I Googled Zen doodling. And this was created from what I can see by somebody doing spiral lines from the center, almost like octopus tentacles or a pinwheel. You do the lines, and then in every section that's open, you create a different design. And this looks larger than mine. Mine are about 3.5 inches square. I like to do them quick and be done with them. If you want to do larger, you can do that. This one I thought looked like about 8 by 10 or 8.5 by 11 paper. So that would take longer, but remember, you know, you can do quick and have a 5-minute break and focus, or you could do a half-hour break or an hour break and be focused on totally that. And that's a different place you go to with your brain. So here's an example of how you can easily just start right now if you wanted to give yourself a place to do some practice doodles. And if I were going to do this, what I would show you is how you can easily take your pen, and I used to do this when I was in school for a creative art kind of situation where I wanted to focus on that. And all you do is you take your line and you start doing a scribble. And the more you overlap, the more sections you'll have. So you create this scribble that overlaps and circles around. And when you come back to where you started, you have a completed design. And then every section that's here, such as this section, is where you'll put your design for a doodle. And each section will be looking different. So that's what I give you as a basis to start in if you want. I, like I said, use little squares, and I sometimes do a square in the square or a circle or a rectangle. But for somebody just starting and you want to kind of practice some patterns, you can do this on a regular piece of paper. Another example I found was somebody who took circles by tracing around lids, or, you know, if you have some sort of circular object that you want to trace around, and everywhere you overlap it, you create these little sections that you will then fill in with different designs. So that's another way to give yourself kind of this first starting pattern to then fill in. And now we'll walk through my process. So remember, this is a 3.5 size piece of paper. It's very small. And like I said, I usually grab one to do quickly. If you want something larger, you can have larger. For this process, I'm using a small square so that I can show you from beginning to end, and then you can take it into the more detailed areas or a larger format. And I'll give you some other even cool ideas that you can use different materials for. So I talked a little bit about what you need: pen, paper, and maybe a pencil. When I refer to the pen I'm using, I get my Sharpie fine point out, and that's my go-to pen I use. It's a Sharpie fine point. I find them at my local Dollar Tree store. They're easy to find. They have a lot of control to them. They don't smear, so that's why I like a Sharpie fine point. If you have another black ink pen, that would be fine too. You just want one that's nice and bold and won't smear, that kind of thing. So, and here are pencil lines, because I often start with just a little pencil outline on my shape and maybe some lines in it. But after this initial pencil thing, I go to my ink then, and I use my ink. So I created a letter H here, a bulky letter H. You can do any letter, you could do a square, whatever it is you want to do. If you already did that other scribble, that's fine too. And then I come up with some separation of space by doing lines. They can overlap, or they can be wavy, like I did here, without any overlaps. They could be straight up and down, you know, perpendicular to each other, horizontal, vertical lines. Your flexibility is great. You can do whatever you want. And remember that it is the brain focus while you're doing this that is helping you to de-stress and relax. Any questions so far before we go on to the ink use then? Okay, so here I started to use my pen. I picked up my Sharpie fine point, and what I did was go around the outline on the outside edge, and then I also did the inside lines. Sometimes I do those inside lines, sometimes I don't. If you don't do them, it just gives you a different effect. When I have a lot of little spaces, I often don't do them because just the design against design gives you a different feel, and you're concentrating on doing your patterns more than, you know, making the lines filled in. But each part of it, as you're flowing along with the process, you're still focused and concentrating on what you're doing. So it works either way. So I did all my lines that I had in pencil, and then I started to fill in a pattern. And the first one I did was this kind of checkerboard pattern. And then I did circles just to kind of counterbalance what I did. So what my brain's thinking about when I'm doing this is trying to pick out a different pattern that I see. And it comes from the top of my, like just off the top of my brain. I'm not really looking at anything. But if you want to look at something to get an idea for patterns, I say, look around you on the floor, the carpet, the drapery, the walls. You might see things that give you ideas for patterns, because a lot of people tell me, I don't know where to get, you know, these ideas for patterns. Where do you get all these different ones? Well, I'm also going to show you some resources where you can go to get them. But sometimes I just am kind of being crazy with my brain, like I did when I doodled in school, and just be real free and easy with what comes out. So I did the checkerboard, I did the circle, and then over here, I actually started to fill the checkerboard in first before I did the other lines, because sometimes I go back and forth between doing lines or filling it in. And I'm always looking for adding lots of darks and lights for contrast, because a lot of times I keep my designs all black and white. Every once in a while I add color, and I'll show you how I do that. But in this case right here, I was thinking black and white. So after I filled in my checkerboard, then I went to the rainbow type effect, and I filled that in every other arch with the black and white. And then I did these little squiggle lines for a variation. And here I did a continuous back and forth straight line that filled that in. So then here is my finished black and white project, which I probably more often than not say I'm done with that. I'm going to go on to something else. Sometimes though, if I were going to do more black and white, I could have filled in more of these triangles to give contrast. I could have done more of the black here in this stripe pattern. I could have done more in these squares. So there's a lot, like I said, a lot of variation and options you have. After I did this line, I went and did these vertical lines, and then I filled in with the triangles and some scribbles in the skinny part. And the last one I did was this overlapping squares and rectangles, just because I wanted to do something a little more intricate and kind of complicated. So that's what I did there with that. So remember, your options are black and white, or you can add color, and all the different textures and patterns you see around you for inspiration. I, at this point, didn't add more black to it. Like I said, I could have if I were keeping it black and white, because I'm going to show you how I added color in case you want to keep going further. So say I took about 15 minutes to do this, and I still want to sit there and keep going. I could have colored more with black, or I can color with my colored pencils, which is what I'm going to show you. You're still continuing the process where you're actively engaging your brain to work on that doodle. So does that make sense to everybody? It's that continued process. Maybe you only want a 10-minute break. Maybe you want to sit there for an hour and create. And that focus of your brain and the way you're just relaxing is helping you to de-stress and to relax. Questions about that before I show you some videos for ideas? Okay, so these videos, I'll send you the links to them when I send you the email. And the reason I picked them is because the person who made them gives you a whole lot of ideas for different patterns. And once you get these, you'll see there's a lot more that you can find too, because it's a popular topic. So if you just search Zen Doodle patterns, you'll find things like this. Now I chose this one because it's sped up, it's kind of fast speed, and it's a variation of this person using just lines, all lines. Now she could have continued and filled in more black areas, but she wanted you to see in these little samples, which are about 2 inches by 2 inches, how many different patterns you can come up with using just lines. So I'll let it run for a little while, and if you want to start filling in your patterns, you can start to do that. Even if you just start a section and then go on to another one, you'll be able to follow your original start to keep finishing it later on, because I'm not going to let this video run for the whole 7 minutes. I'm going to run enough that you get some samples to see what you can try. And they are all so different. Like the one she's doing with curvy lines right now reminds me of a Picasso painting. The one with these triangles looks almost like spider web type designs. Even watching it is very kind of relaxing, because if you focus and you wouldn't be talking and you just watch this, you'll hear there's some music box music playing when you get the link. So watching it is also relaxing, but creating it brings a whole different focus to your brain. And even as she does these, like that one, there's so many different things you could do with just the first steps to change it. So that's the other thing. Once you create large spaces, you can fill them in with a lot of different things in the little spaces. And coloring it black and white would change how it looks. I often try to put sections against sections that are light or darker, so that you have that contrast. And that's another thing making my kind of work on, what do I want to do here? I want it to look like this. So I'm going to start going through these a little bit faster. So here you can see the pen she's using is a micron pen. That's another brand that works well and does have different sizes. Oh no, hers is a uni pen fine line. There are also ones called microns. So those are different brands of pens to use. The microns and the uni pens are found in art sections or scrapbooking sections because of the way the ink is kept intact and fade proof and all that. My Sharpie fine point does just the same kind of effect, and they're a little less expensive than some of the higher end pens. So I am going to start going through some of this a little faster. When you get the link, you can go back to it and visit it and practice a little. I often send people in my class out of class with some fun homework to do if they want to. And I had learners who say they do this almost every day now, and it gives them a very nice focus of a way of de-stressing. So especially if you have worries in your minds or bad thoughts, this is just something that can kind of force it out of there for a while. Questions about anything while I'm letting this run? All right, I'm going to keep going a little faster here so you can see some of the other samples. And depending on how you do your lines, you get a whole different feel for what that looks like. These lines make me think of a quilted square where, you know, you have lights and darks. If your lines are closer together, you end up with more shadowy effect. This is one of the only ones she starts to use more black in to color in and give a contrast. So that gives a different effect than just the circles. And the same way with this one is more like a topographical map. It's hard to see because that came up on, but that's the first one. And then this is the next one, which is similar. Same person creates them. Question? Sue, did you have a question?
No, sorry.
That's okay. So this one is the same person. That's what I mean. Once you find one, you'll find a lot. The difference is she's taking very more meticulous steps to create the patterns. They're smaller because I think they are more meticulously done with a ruler. You can use a ruler if you want. I often don't. I just do straight lines free-handed. I mean, if you're concentrating on making things more perfectly linear, you're still in the process of thinking and creating, so that would work. She's also showing you how to take the exact same lines and do different things with them that you get a whole different effect. So the first one had none in it. The second one's some contrast of fill in, and this one's contrast with some other lines. So up here in the right-hand corner, I like this too, because she shows you what's coming up and what she's doing in each little box. So this is another link you'll have to follow and try some of these things if you want. And she explains it, filling gaps. So we went from lines and now she's doing circles. Different things you can do with circles. Up here she shows larger circles filled in. And then the next one are, this is a solid one. I don't know what's, just so she show, I guess she's showing you, don't forget, you can fill it in solid if you want to. And then there's more stippling, I call it, done with the point, where you're just making dots. And you could make those dots darker by putting them close together in certain areas and further apart. Then we have just some circles. Yes, we can color them in or leave them plain. Same with squares and triangles. And there's some more connected triangles. Now I need to get rid of that. Can't get rid of my brush. Sorry, I made that be in the way. I can't get rid of it. That's one thing. I don't want to see that. Okay, there we go. So here we have some that look like stitching on a piece of fabric or something. I kind of like how you can do that too and give it a totally different effect. Here's ones that are overlapping. They look like just arches that overlap and the different things she does with that for effect. Here's some of the curly cues. I like curly cues that are almost like snail shells. There's some more overlapping arches that she puts a line in, and then it starts to look almost like a cushion. And some shapes, you can always do shapes. That's a fatter Sharpie. I have one that I sometimes use for filling in areas. They do bleed more, but instead of coloring in with a fine point, you could use a fatter one if you want. So the one up here is similar to my overlapping squares. She added some triangles, colored some areas in. This is where I like to show you that the effect of the lines you do can be darker or lighter, and she's pulling out as she goes from the edge to the center. So it gives you a whole different effect with that. So that's the other video for examples. Questions? All right, so if you want to keep going on with this, instead of coloring more black and white in, you can go to color. And that's where I get out my colored pencils and start to decide what colors I want to use, where I'm going to fill in, almost like you decide where you want to fill in with other black ink. But now I'm just looking at color and playing with color. And just like using adult coloring books is found to give your brain some good exercise and some good relaxing therapy, that's what you're kind of doing here. You're taking your black and white creation and going a little further with color. And so I thought about, where I wanted to leave the white spaces. And in my square here, I had to actually really think about what was square and what was background so that I colored in only the background. And that is concentrating and really focusing on that. So that's where that comes into play. So remember, your options are more or less, simple or ornate. You can be very complicated with the designs that you make. And remember, it is the process in creating that matters the most. And to share this with others is also a great thing. I had somebody tell me they were going to take it to their senior center. They do a class with them and they were going to show this and do a whole session where they sat around and did it together. Another thing would be if you want to Zoom with your grandchildren or other children in your family, and you'd say, let's all create a Zen doodle together, that you did it in person and created it. So even the process of sharing it is a fun way of having a little bit of art therapy. So here's some other examples of mine. This one on the right is, again, spiraling lines that I did. I think I only did like 3 of them. And then I started to fill in the spirals with other spirals and came up with this pattern. I did add a little color and shading to it, but these are all 3.5-inch square ones. And these over here are a grouping I did with them. The one on the left top corner is just black and white, but then I wanted you to see also where I did add color to some other ones to carry that further. And that process, like I said, just continues on with the one you start with, which is focusing. The leaves were very random, just my own creation. I think the top left one I got from a sample, but just did it a little differently. And then these I did on my own with some samples that I added color to. Questions for any of that? Okay, I'm going to quick show you the reason I carry, I use the 3.5-inch squares is because I carry a little pouch with me. So this is just a pencil pouch. I think I got it at the Dollar Tree store. And I grab it when we go camping, or if I was flying on a plane and I knew I'm going to have a stressful situation. I haven't flown for probably 8 or 9 years, but I remember the last one was like a lot of air turbulence and I was not happy. I could have this with me. I did see people doing little, sketches on the plane. I didn't even think of this at the time, but now that I take this with me camping when we go away, it brought to mind flying. So in my little pencil pouch that I got for $1 are my cut squares. And the cut squares, I just took cardstock I have on hand. You could use heavier like computer paper if you want. I wouldn't go with anything too thin. I like this because it gives me more substance to it. And I carry usually like I have like a little piece of masonite board with me. And these are the sizes you can see. It's 3.5-inch square, pretty small, but that's what I do with my squares. Then I have them in a pile. I have about 20 there. I create something and then I put it back in my pouch. Also in my pouch, I have my pens and my eraser. So there's the eraser I like. I got that at the dollar store. It's got that white cartridge in and it gives you a lot of control. There's my Sharpie pen, my fine point. And I do have a broader one that's permanent ink, and a pencil is in here. So those are my basic little things that are very easy to carry with me, zip it up and have it in my pouch. So I wanted to show you that as an example. The other thing I don't have right at hand, but I go to the dollar store every once in a while to get things I need and find that they have some new and always seem to be adding things. I was looking at their coloring books. So I actually saw coloring books where they were nice, bold shapes for adults. You could take them and use those shapes, whatever the object is or picture, and fill it in with lines and patterns. And instead of making your own scribble, you can use what's there. So I thought that was something interesting to think about too. So here's an example of what I mean when I'm talking about like this one down here. I could see that would be in a coloring book for adults. And instead of coloring with colors, you could fill it in with patterns. So that's another idea for you. If you want to do actual objects or landscapes or flowers, where you fill it in with pattern. And I think when I did one on, so it's finding resources on Google is another good example. If you do Zen doodles and you look at images instead of just all, because if you do all, you get how to create. But if you look at images, this is where you get a really good sample of some patterns to try to put into your own designs. And here's one I often see that reminds me of a coloring book where you could fill in those patterns. Now they make coloring books that already have these patterns in for you to color. That also is a way to de-stress, but I like the idea of finding a big, large, plain object in the coloring book and then putting all these patterns in by yourself. That's just a different, more like even here with the owl. So that would be a way that you could do your own shapes and things. So that's what you find if you do a search on Google. I also use Pinterest because I save things and I can go back there to my page. If anybody does Pinterest and you have an account, the very nice thing about Pinterest is that it is a good place to find inspiration, resources, and to save them. So this is my drawing and doodling page that I saved. And in here are ideas for doodles. So here's like leaves. If I drew my own leaves, I could fill them in with patterns and come up with that kind of thing. The other thing is that there is some reference to whether you're doing waves, or here's samples for patterns. And here's one that's similar to the scribble I showed you, where you'd be taking that scribble and filling in all the sections with that. So that's a resource on Pinterest. Here's the thing I said about coloring books being a sample, and I found this on YouTube as somebody who's sort of doing the same thing with her own similar type coloring book pattern. So she's making her own picture to start with, but remember, you could be also doing this in a coloring book page that already exists. So there's her supplies she's showing you, and I am going to go through this a little bit too so that you can see some of it. And she's giving herself some really big, bold pattern areas. She's using a Crayola marker. I've seen that at the dollar store too. Now she starts to fill in the big patterns with smaller patterns. And then what she ends up doing is filling in those larger areas with a lot of smaller lines. So it's a continual process of making it go further and further with the patterns you're using. And I thought that was a good thing to show you how you can take a large coloring design and fill it in with pattern. And then she starts to use some black and white to fill it in with the contrast. Questions as we watch the end of this? I think I've even seen on Amazon, if you search on Amazon, they have a lot of Zen doodling books and supplies. And I think I've seen somebody who sells larger pre-printed pictures that you can fill in. But like I said, I think you can find them similar things, you know, at less expensively. So when I did a search on my apps, because sometimes people want to know electronically, is it available for their iPad? This was the only one I really found that looked similar. It's called Doodle Patterns. It does cost money. I didn't buy it, but I thought if anybody's interested, it looked very similar. They give you patterns. They walk you through how to do it. They probably even give you space to practice on your iPad, or maybe give you a pattern to download. I'm not sure, but it was rated pretty high. So I thought that was worth mentioning as an app. Here's a finished example of circles that overlap. And this circles they used were all the same size. And then each little overlap area has a very intricate, nice little design in, and that's what it ends up looking like. So here you can see the contrast of the very heavy, darker black patterns versus the very finer, you know, whiter, less black areas. So that contrast in my mind, I think about how I want which pattern to be beside the other pattern. This I told you about looks like to me a landscape coloring picture that they filled in with pattern. And this one was done by somebody in my class who was working along with us and sent it to me as an example. And they didn't finish it, but they were able to show you some variation with stippling here. some of the curlicues, and then how the lines get darker when you keep going out from a source, or the stippling when you make it closer together with those dots and it gets darker. So that gives you an idea how you can make contrast without even coloring it in. Here would be a great coloring book pattern to fill in. I found this one on Google. When I put in coloring book pages, you can actually find coloring book pages to print out and do on your own if you wanted to do that. So I thought that was an example of what I meant when I'm talking about larger areas to then fill in with smaller designs. That would work out really good. And here is the one I did in the beginning to show you what you could fill in with to give that variation in contrast. So here's a dark, heavier black and white pattern beside a very airy, lighter looking pattern because of what's used. The same way with this cross-hatching vertical horizontal lines, you get a darker feel to it compared to the dots or the dots over here. So this was done electronically on an app I have for the purpose of showing you how it can look. What I do to fill this in is not by hand. And let me say, you need to create by hand to really have your brain focused on that creation. And I prefer almost always using my pencil, pen, paper, paints to do real creations. This app, though, has been kind of helpful for showing and doing certain things in my demos. And then people want to know what it is. And I do use it sometimes for creating things too. It's called Sketches. And I have it on my iPad. I have an older iPad mini, so it's not an iPad Pro fancy. I use my regular stylus, which is very simple and it works well. So you don't need a fancy Apple pen. And it's free. Now you can upgrade by adding extra tools to it, but the ones they give you for free are nice and basic enough to play with. And this is similar to what you see when you get it. There's pencils, pens, paint brushes, a calligraphy pen. So I've had it many, many years, and I did upgrade because I wanted some of the other tools. But more often than not, I'm using the ones that I got for free anyway. And you can do a lot of things to play with it. So that's where, oh, and it is, if you look up Sketches in the Apple App Store or Android apps, you'll find it. And it's made by Taya Sui. I put that on there so you know who creates it in case you're looking for that specific app. It's called Sketches. So I've had it on my iPad many, many years, and it's really the one I use the most to play around with when I am doing electronic things. Questions? Okay, let me. All right.
Excuse me. What was that? Tools? Those?
It's called Sketches, and it's an app you can get for your iPad.
But you showed us some instruments, the different pencils and stuff.
That's
markers?
what comes with the app.
So you use it on the app?
Yes, it's all for electronic playing around with things like I did this one here. This was done all on my iPad.
Okay, so it looks like an old-fashioned telephone, and then also some kind of animal. So that's my interpretation of your picture. But yeah.
Oh, okay, thanks. It's like an ink blot. You're interpreting the ink blot. Okay, so some more information I'm providing so that you can find some things out. If you go on Amazon and you put in Zen Doodling, you get a lot of resources, whether it's books or supplies. This is called Zen Tangle Basics. This is a book I found 10 years ago when I first found out about this structured doodling. And Zen Tangle is a term that is copyrighted, and the people who created it have supplies and books, classes. You can take classes, you can become certified to teach classes, and that's who wrote this book. She became certified Zen Tangle person, Suzanne McNeil. It's about 20 pages long and walks you through basics. I have it, but really this was before all the electronic resources you can now find. So you can find all this stuff on Google, on YouTube, a lot of things that you have free access to. So that's, I just put it there as a resource that I used in case anybody wants to get a book. They have a lot more books. I only have this one. And then this one here is another book I saw as an example that's not tied into the Zentangle copyright thing. This is called Zen Doodles, Tons of Tangles. And so I'm sure in this book, here again, you see there's lots of samples of patterns that they walk you through how to create, and they talk about it. So that was a book that I found that I thought you might like if you look on Amazon. My resources I told you about were Google and Pinterest. Those are really good places to go, and YouTube. You'll find tons of stuff on YouTube. Questions before I wrap it up for anybody?
Sorry, I missed your introduction. But is it a matter that you're putting your energy into the drawing that's making you de-stressed?
So it's the focus of your brain. And what I would say, Deb, is if you want to request a recording of this, you'll see the part you missed, but it's how you're really focusing your brain by concentrating on creating the pattern when you're drawing that is helping you to de-stress.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So doodles are aimless or casual scribbles, designs, or sketches, and Zen doodles are structured shapes and patterns you can draw. And drawing the Zen doodles helps you to focus your brain, relax, and de-stress. Those are the main points. And when I wrap this up, you'll get an email. Thank you for sharing your hour with me for this class. If you will do any social media and you either want to tag it with the hashtag get set up or the @ symbol with get set up, you can put that in your comments, or you can write an email to liz@getsetup.io. She does a lot with blogs and sharing things on social media, and sometimes she shares things our learners contribute. If you need that recording or more help, this is the email, help@getsetup.io. And that's what would be the link for asking for that recording. And Noreen said, thank you. I used to do this all the time. I hope to get back into it. Yes, I agree, Noreen. I haven't done as much more, so recently than I used to do it. And Pam said, thank you. This is much more helpful than I thought it would be. That's good. Well, that's good too. I do have people in classes saying, okay, I made these squares of paper. Now what am I going to do with them? And I didn't really talk much about that. But to me, I did what I needed to do. So I don't do much more with them. But other people who don't want to just like throw them to the side and forget about them have suggested decoupaging them on boxes, turning them into greeting cards where you glue them down. I have thought about, you could make a strip with 5 in a row that you frame and you hang on your wall. There's a lot of things you can continue to do with the created square if you want to, but the process right here for creating is what we were focused on.
Here's one I did.
Oh, Noreen's sharing. Oh, Noreen, you have the virtual background does not let us share it very good.
Oh, okay, hold on.
Okay, we'll wait for you.
If I can figure out how to do it, okay, I know how to do it.
You got it. It's a lower left box there.
Yeah.
It says mute. I'm sorry. Yeah, there you go. Wow, that's beautiful, Noreen.
Thank you.
Yes, that's wonderful. How long did that take you?
Oh, I did this in 2012, so I don't remember.
You haven't been working on it for 8 or 9 years, have you?
No, I did it. No, when I was doing it, all the time. I love doing it.
Okay. Yeah, that's how I did those little ones was like 10 years ago too.
Christine, thank you so much.
You're welcome, Sue.
I'm going to show you mine.
Okay, great. Go ahead.
Can you see it?
No, you're not sharing your video. You have to go to the bottom left corner and click share video. Oh, you're on an iPad. Somebody tell her where. Oh, there, now we see you. Okay, show us, Sue. over towards the camera hole. It's like up and to your left, a little bit to your left. There you go. Now down a little bit. Now we see it. Wonderful. Yes, that's great, Sue. Thanks for sharing.
I
Did
love
anybody, did you just do that now, Sue?
Yes, just now.
Okay, good. Great. Anybody else do one now they want to share? Oh, you were really busy. That's great. So one of my learners from a previous class, she told me she just loved this. She does it a little bit every day, and she thinks it has been a really helpful thing. So that was my goal with providing you with this, so that it would help you maybe in some little way to kind of focus on having fun and being more creative. So I hope that helped. So anybody else who's looking for other classes I do, we have the Art of Collage and Torn Paper and Introduction to Calligraphy. And then these are some related classes that I found that had to do with kind of relaxing and forgetting our problems. And one was Meditating Together, a social hour, an interest group, Laugh and Reminisce. And I put that there twice. That shouldn't be there twice, but I must have liked it a lot. So after this, you'll get notes in an email. It'll have those main points in it. It'll have a link to give me feedback. And if you click on that, you get this form to fill out. And we ask that you give it anywhere from 1 to 5 stars, depending on how much you liked it, and make any comments about it that you have, and then tell us how we could improve or what other classes we could offer. So remember, you can share this information with your friends to spread the news about what Get Set Up is all about. If you're interested in hosting a group, you can do that and send the information to help@getsetup.io. We're growing every week by becoming more associated with other community groups. So remember that we're going to be offering new and different classes. And is there anybody who needs any help with the Get Set Up website information? We created a whole new look to it about a little bit less than a month ago. And I think many people like what they're seeing and how you can use it to schedule classes. Did anybody have any questions? All right, well, if not, then I will say thank you to everybody for coming, and have a great rest of your day, and go and create some doodles and relax.
Okay, thank you very much.
Here
It
again.
was a lot of
Take
fun.
care.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Take care and have a great rest of your day.
Okay, you